The memory of the first men of iron and thunder burns in me more fiercely than any brand the Spaniards pressed into my flesh. I am an old man now, my hair thin and gray, my warrior's strength long since gone, yet when I close my eyes, I stand once more on the causeway above the lake, staring at a world that had suddenly become strange. In my youth, the world was not a mystery. It was Tenochtitlan. I grew up on an island near the great city, where the water mirrored the sky and the floating gardens lay in careful rows. The cries of water birds woke us. The scent of wet earth, flowers, and cooking maize filled the air. Life felt ordered, balanced. The twin temples of Tenochtitlan rose at the center of our world like stone mountains. I would watch the priests climb the steep steps, their cloaks stiff with dried blood, while the drums boomed like distant thunder. This was natural to me, as natural as the coming of the rains. My earliest memories are of our warriors returning from campaigns, their armor painted bright, their helmets shaped like jaguars and eagles. While other children chased fish, I copied their stances with a carved stick. When I took my first captive in a flower war, I earned the right to wear a warrior's cloak. Our city knew its place in the empire. We paid our tribute, we sent our warriors, and we followed the word of the Huey Tlatoani. Our world was enough. Of course, we had heard stories of strangers from the east, men who arrived in floating mountains. But they were as unreal to me as the gods carved on temple walls curiosities of rumor, not something that could ever stride our causeways. My world was sharpening obsidian blades for warriors who painted their faces as we did, who prayed to the same gods. But the world had already begun to change. Messengers from the coast brought strange gifts, a knife of glittering metal, not obsidian, cold and heavy and sharp on both sides. A broken length of wood with iron set into it washed ashore. The priests frowned. The old women muttered that the gods of the east were waking. Then came the flame in the sky. A streak of fire tore across the heavens, bright as molten copper, and vanished beyond the eastern mountains. An omen. One of the older warriors told me, when the gods wish to turn the world, they do not ask the permission of men. After that, a restlessness settled over the city. The priests whispered of more omens. A temple that caught fire without cause, water that boiled in calm basins, a woman's voice wailing in the night. One morning, the shell trumpets sounded. Not the slow calls of ceremony, but harsh, repeated blasts. Runners arrived, their words tumbling out floating mountains. Men who shone like mirrors, animals like giant deer whose hooves shattered the earth. We were summoned. Warriors were chosen from many cities to go east and look upon these strangers. I was among them. We marched toward the coast. The air grew warmer, wetter. Each night, more messengers joined us, bringing rumors. They have animals that eat men, one said. They vomit fire from tubes of stone, another swore. Arrows bounce off them like rain off jade. When we finally reached the coast, we saw them. Riding on the vast blue water were the floating mountains. Their sides rose from the water like walls, their backs a forest of poles and patched, dirty white cloth. Fire would spurt from their sides, and a crack like a split mountain rolled over the water, making my bones tremble. An older warrior, Tilpotonqui, said to me, "When jaguars come down from the hills, they do not come to admire the maize. Our lords ordered us to meet them with gifts, feathered cloaks, gold, food." The strangers sent back beads of bright glass, and more troubling things, helmets and blades of that shining, heavy metal. Their animals, those monstrous deer, tore at the earth with their hooves. Their skin was pale as grubs kept from the sun. They laughed loudly and looked at our gold with eyes that burned. Our first meeting was not battle. It was ceremony. We stood on one side of a field, our captains in jaguar skins and quetzal feathers. They stood on the other, their leader in metal from head to foot, a woman at his side who spoke both our tongue and theirs. Words were exchanged. promises, but even then, we knew. Their gaze was always to the west, toward our valley, toward the source of our tribute. Tlopatonqui muttered, "They are counting how much can be taken." We shadowed them as they began to move inland. The air stank of sweat, iron, and the sour bite of their strange powder. We had heard of their thunder weapons, but hearing is not knowing. The first battle I saw showed the difference. It was against a city that had tried to swallow the strangers, and been swallowed instead. Our warriors advanced in great painted ranks. Theirs came in tight clusters of metal and cloth. Then one lifted a long stick. A spark flared, a burst of smoke and fire. A tearing crack ripped the air. Men fell, with small wounds where something unseen had bitten deep. Our line shuddered. Again and again the thunderstick spoke, coughing out smoke and death. It was so sudden, so contemptuous of a warrior's courage. Yet they were not invincible. When our warriors closed with them, they could be pulled from their animals, their metal skins hacked at the joints, where flesh met air. We learned their animals feared our drums. We learned the man in metal still breathed, still bled. In that first clash, I smashed my makoawitl against the joint of one of their warriors' armor. Bone and iron gave way. His eyes, blue as lake water, widened in pain. For an instant, I saw not a demon, but a man young, afraid, far from his home. Then he fell, and his strange blood wet the dust. My world, our world was ending, and in that moment, I finally understood the terror of the omen that had burned across our sky. Victory in that city wasn't ours. It belonged to them. Their native allies opened the gates. Their captain seized our lords and strangled them. One feast turned into a massacre, their weapons tearing through dancers and nobles, painting the walls with blood. I remember a courtyard littered with bodies, the air thick with smoke, incense, and gunpowder, my ears ringing. A young girl in festival clothes knelt beside her father, her hands red to the wrist, her mouth open in a silent scream. My spear felt heavy. The world I knew had cracked. From that day on, our marching wasn't a calm patrol. It was the strained pace of men walking toward a storm. They moved relentlessly toward our lake and our city. We sent envoys. We sent gold. We sent warnings through dreams and omens. Still, they came. When they finally reached the causeway and entered Tenochtitlan, it was under banners of peace, flanked by our own warriors. Some of our lords thought they could use these strangers to cut down their rivals. The city shone, its temples and palaces rising from the water like homes of the gods. The Spaniards stared like men who had stumbled into paradise, wanting to both worship and plunder it. Their captain met our emperor, the Huey Tlatoani, in the great plaza. Words were exchanged through their translator. Gifts were given. For a short time, a fragile peace held. A net of courtesy spread over a pit. Then they took our lord prisoner in his own palace. The ground shifted beneath us. We were ordered to stay calm, told our lord allowed this to manage these wild men. But we knew something sacred had been broken. Foreign warriors slept in the palace, their images raised on our sacred walls. Tension coiled like a serpent. It snapped during a festival. You've heard of that day. During a celebration, with drums thundering and dancers whirling, the Spaniards sealed the exits of the sacred courtyard and attacked the unarmed celebrants. Their swords rose and fell. Their thundersticks roared. Feathers, gold, and petals were spattered with blood and brains. Men were hacked apart among the offerings they'd brought for the gods. By the time we fought our way through, the courtyard was a butcher's canal. The air smelled of flowers and death. After that, there was no more pretense. We besieged the palace, throwing stones, spears, and curses. They answered with thunder and iron. Our own lord, dragged to the roof to speak to us, died there. Some say by their hand, some by ours. It doesn't matter. The bond between king and people was already gone. The street fighting that followed was like nothing I'd ever known. We knew every alley, every canal, every roof. We tore down bridges and raised barricades. We dragged their horses from under them and their cannons into the lake. For nights, the sky glowed red, reflected in bloody water. The screams of the wounded mixed with the crash of falling walls. Finally, under the cover of a dark, rainy night, the Spaniards and their allies tried to flee along the causeway. We fell on them like knives. The lake swallowed men, horses, and treasure. Our canoes darted among them, warriors dragging down anyone they could reach. That night is a blur of chaos-broken weapons, floating bodies, the glint of gold vanishing into black water. For a moment, we thought we had won. We were wrong. With their return came disease. It crept through our city like a shadow. We couldn't fight it with obsidian blades or prayers. Blisters bloomed on skin. Fevers raged. Men and women who once walked proudly now lay groaning on mats. Whole families died in their homes. I didn't get sick. Sometimes I think that was the cruelest fate. Because when the Spaniards returned, with more men, more allies, more cannons, we were fewer, weaker, and grieving. They surrounded our city. They cut our causeways. They set up their cannons and fired day after day, smashing walls, collapsing houses, showering us with stone and terror. But we fought. Street by street, step by step, we fought. Our canoes darted among their ships. Women carried stones to the rooftops. Children brought water to the fighters. Priests cut themselves, smearing blood on the faces of our idols, begging for a miracle. No miracle came. Hunger joined disease and thunder. I remember one day on a broken causeway. My shield was splintered, my obsidian sword shattered, my throat raw from shouting. The air was thick with smoke. Arrows hissed past. A group of Spaniards advanced behind their Tlaxcalan allies. We charged. I saw my friend Tilpotonqui fall, a hole punched through his chest, his eyes wide with surprise. Something slammed into my shoulder, spinning me around. I hit the stones hard. My hand wouldn't close on my weapon. The sounds of battle grew muffled, as if I were underwater. A shadow fell over me. A Spaniard stood there, his face streaked with sweat and soot. Our eyes locked. He lifted his sword. I saw a notch in its edge, a smear of old blood. But I didn't die. Another man shouted something in their harsh tongue. The sword lowered. Rough hands grabbed me. A rope bit into my wrists. I was shoved to the rear with the other captives. It is a bitter thing to survive. I spent the last days of the siege watching my city die with my hands bound. I saw smoke curl from the smashed temples. I saw so many bodies floating in the canals that the water itself seemed made of flesh. I heard the wails of women, the muttering of priests whose gods had fallen silent. When our last lord finally surrendered, they didn't release us. We became their labor. We tore down our own temples, stone by stone, under their whips and curses. We dragged the great carved blocks to build their churches. We cleared streets of bodies until the smell of death seeped into our very skin. The lake that once gleamed with canoes and flowers grew choked with the rubble of our world. Thank you for watching. The story of Tenochtitlan is a powerful and tragic part of our shared human history. If you found this narrative compelling, please like and subscribe for more stories from the past. Years rolled on like a river thick with silt. The men of iron and thunder did not vanish. They spread. They divided our lands and gave them new names. Their priests splashed water on children's heads and said the old gods were demons. Their officials counted us like maize cobs. Their diseases came and came again, thinning us like a field that has been harvested too often. I lived. I worked in fields that had once belonged to my kin, now claimed by a man who could barely speak our tongue. I carried stones. I cut wood. I stood in lines to pay tribute, not to Tenochtitlan, but to a king across the sea whose face I would never see. Now, as an old man with more memories than strength, I sit where the lake once lapped at the stones. The city is different. Streets run where canals once shone. Horse hooves ring where once only sandals whispered. Tall towers rise bearing bells instead of drums. In the plazas, men and women walk wearing cloth cut in foreign patterns, crosses hanging at their throats. At the edges of the markets, a few still sell obsidian blades and feathered cloaks, but they seem like relics from a dream. Children race past me, laughing, their games laced with words from both tongues. They speak of saints and of the Mother of God with the same casual reverence their grandparents once used for Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli. Some of them carry little wooden swords shaped like the Spaniards' blades. Others pretend to fire invisible thundersticks at each other, falling down with exaggerated groans. Sometimes they ask me about the old days. "Grandfather," they say, though we are not kin, "tell us about when the men of iron came. Were you afraid? Did you fight them? Did you kill any of them?" I look at their bright faces and see, for a heartbeat, my own younger self, standing on a causeway above a shining lake, thinking the world must always be as it was. Yes, I tell them. I was afraid. I describe, in careful words, the first time I saw the floating mountains on the sea, the first crash of their thunder, the way Tilbotunqui's heart seemed to leap from his chest in a spray of blood. I speak of how small our city, which had once seemed to fill the world, looked when ringed with their allies and their cannons. I talk of the night the causeways ran slick, of the sound bodies make when they strike water from too great a height. They shiver and laugh, delighted by the horror. Then I say, remember this. Whatever you think will last forever, your temples, your language, the rule of those who command you, there will come a day when something you cannot imagine walks into your plaza. It will speak a tongue you do not know, carry tools you do not understand, and make your proud skills feel suddenly thin as smoke. On that day, you will learn how small you are. They grow quiet at that, for a moment. Children prefer tales of single heroes and simple villains to the slow, grinding teeth of change. They want stories where courage is enough to turn the tide. But life, I have learned, seldom bends so easily. When the clouds hang low over the city and the bells toll in the distance, I can still hear, faintly, the echo of the first thunder that rolled across that coastal valley. I see again shining helmets, the animals with metal on their faces, the banners snapping above them. I remember how we thought them monsters, and how, when I looked into the eyes of the man I speared on that first battlefield, I saw only a terrified youth. We thought them demons. They doubtless thought the same of us. In truth, we were all merely men, swept together by the great, indifferent winds that blow from sea to valley and back again. The men of iron and thunder did not just bring steel and disease. They brought a mirror held up to our world, showing us that Tenochtitlan was not the center of all things, but one city among many, perched on the rim of a vast unknown. That knowledge was more terrible than any cannon. Yet there is a bitter kind of comfort in it. If even the mightiest cities can sink into rubble, so too can the harshest rule someday crumble. If the thunder of cannons could become something we endure, perhaps far in some future, we will hear no thunder at all, neither from their guns nor from our drums calling men to die. Perhaps there will be a time when strangers arrive and are not greeted with spears or chains. I do not expect to see that world. My path grows short. But each night I offer a small prayer, not only to the God nailed on their crosses, nor only to the old gods whose names I still whisper, but to whatever listens beyond all names. May the next great change that marches into someone's city bring less blood than the last. Until then, the memory remains. I am an old warrior, my hands more used now to grinding maize than to gripping a spear. But in my dreams, the air still reeks of smoke and blood. Sky is the color of bruised stone, and the first line of men in metal and their towering beasts is forever, advancing along the causeway toward our glittering city. As long as I live to remember that sight, those cries, those dead, that moment when the world cracked open, the story of the conquistadors' advance is not entirely gone.